The scariest monsters in history do not always begin in darkness. Sometimes they begin in gold. In the early 1400s, France saw Gilles de Rais as a nobleman, a warrior, and a hero of the battlefield. He was rich. He was powerful. He stood beside Joan of Arc during the 100 Years' War. He carried titles, land, soldiers, and a name that opened doors across France. To the outside world, he looked like a man chosen for greatness. But behind the castles, behind the banners, and behind the prayers of medieval France, a different story was waiting. A story so disturbing that even centuries later, people still ask the same question. How could a celebrated commander become one of the darkest figures in criminal history? Gilles de Rais was born into power around 1404. Into one of the noble families of Western France. From childhood, he lived in a world most people could only imagine. Castles, servants, weapons, horses, land, money. His life was not ordinary. His future was not ordinary either. He was raised to command. By the time he was a young man, France was broken by war. The 100 Years' War had torn through the country. English forces held territory. French villages suffered. Kings, nobles, priests, and soldiers all fought for control of a wounded nation. Then Joan of Arc appeared. She was young, fearless, and impossible to ignore. She believed she had been sent by God to save France. Around her gathered soldiers, commanders, and nobles who hoped she could change the war. Among them was Gilles de Rais. On the battlefield, he was not remembered as weak. He fought in important campaigns. He served with the French army. He was connected to the victories that helped lift French hope. In 1429, after the great events around Orléans and the rise of Joan's mission, Gilles was made Marshal of France, one of the highest military honors a man could receive. At that moment, his name belonged to history. But history was not finished with him. After Joan of Arc was captured and later executed, the world around Gilles began to change. The glory faded. The battlefield no longer gave him purpose. He returned to his estates with enormous wealth, heavy pride, and a dangerous emptiness. He spent wildly. He staged plays. He held ceremonies. He bought luxury. He surrounded himself with flatterers, servants, and men who knew how to profit from his weakness. His money drained away, but his hunger did not. The man who had once commanded soldiers now seemed unable to command himself. And then the whispers began. In villages near his castles, children disappeared. At first, the poor had little power to accuse a nobleman. Families could grieve, but grief did not easily cross castle walls. In medieval France, a lord was not just a rich man. He was authority. He was protection. He was danger. People feared speaking too loudly, but silence can only hold for so long. By 1440, accusations against Gilles de Rais had become impossible to ignore. The story that had lived in whispers entered the courts. Parents and witnesses began to speak. Servants were questioned. Names were given. Testimony gathered. The nobleman who had once stood beside Joan of Arc was now being pulled into one of the most shocking trials of the Middle Ages. The charges were horrifying. He was accused of abducting and murdering children. He was also accused of heresy and occult practices. Some accounts claimed his crimes involved attempts to summon demons and restore his fading wealth through forbidden rituals. But the heart of the case was not legend. It was the missing children. Gilles de Rais was not tried as a monster from a storybook. He was tried as a real man, in real courts, facing real testimony. His rank could not fully protect him anymore. His castles could not hide everything. His name could no longer silence everyone. The trial exposed a world behind the walls. It showed how power can protect evil when no one dares challenge it. It showed how wealth can buy obedience. It showed how fear can trap the poor, while the powerful move freely above them. This was not just a trial of one man. It was a trial of a system that had allowed him to stand above ordinary people for too long. As the case unfolded, Gilles first resisted. He argued. He denied. He tried to stand on his rank, his honor, and his past. But the pressure grew. The witnesses kept coming. The court pressed harder. Then came the confession. Gilles de Rais admitted to terrible crimes. The exact number of victims has been debated for centuries, and many later stories became exaggerated. Some accounts speak of dozens, others claim far more. The truth is difficult to measure because the records came from a medieval trial shaped by religion, politics, fear, and confession. But even if the largest numbers are questioned, the darkness of the case remains. Children had disappeared, families had suffered, and a man once celebrated as a hero stood accused and condemned. On October 26, 1440, Gilles de Rais was executed in Nantes. The nobleman, the commander, the Marshal of France, the man who once rode with armies, died as a convicted criminal. His fall was almost impossible to believe. A man who had touched glory ended in disgrace. A man who had fought beside one of France's greatest symbols of faith became linked with some of the most disturbing accusations in medieval Europe. And after his death, his name did not disappear. It became a warning. Some later writers connected him with the legend of Bluebeard, the rich and terrifying nobleman with a secret chamber and a trail of death behind closed doors. Whether that connection is exact or not, it shows how deeply his story entered the imagination of Europe. But the real story is darker than folklore, because it does not need a fairy tale monster. It only needs a man with power. Gilles de Rais reminds us that evil does not always look poor, wild, or desperate. Sometimes it wears armor. Sometimes it owns castles. Sometimes it receives honors from kings. Sometimes it stands beside saints and still carries darkness inside. That is what makes his case so disturbing. The battlefield saw a commander. The court saw a criminal. The poor saw something else long before everyone did. They saw the doors close. They saw the children vanish. They saw what power could hide. And centuries later, when his name is spoken, it does not sound like glory anymore. It sounds like a warning from behind castle walls. Because the most dangerous man in the room is not always the one holding the sword. Sometimes it is the one everyone already trusts.